to talk to. He's the man that led me to the top when nobody else thought I was qualified. All the other promoters, Don King, Bob Arrow, none of them were fooled with me. But J. Russell Peltz said, hey, he still got it. So I'm leaving it up to him to get me the next way. This is the man. If any young fighters want to go to the top like I did, go to this man. He's a fair man. He'll be fair with you.
Peltz Boxing Promotions proudly presents the schedule now.
Well, with that introduction, I want to just say thank you again, Russell, for our end of the 2024 podcast, the sixth podcast for Russell Peltz's YouTube page and everything boxing. But we have a special guest here today, and we're adding Hall of Fame columnist for Philadelphia, Ray Didinger. Thank you very much for being here. And I'm just going to have you two guys enjoy talking about Philly sports wherever you want to go. I have a couple pictures here or there I could throw up. I just want to just say a little bit of business. Russell, how's the book going? We always talk about this a little bit before the holidays if people haven't gotten a holiday gift yet. How's the book going?
The book's going well. Ray reminded me a year ago that it always picks up around the holidays. And it's picking up again now on Amazon. And I'm going to get to 2,000 next year, which for a self-published boxing book, people tell me is like a home run. So if it had come out 20 years ago when a lot of these people were still living, it'd probably be better than that. But I'm so proud of this book. I just can't, tell you. I love it. And as much as anything I've done in boxing, this is right up there.
Well, if anybody's looking for a late-minute Christmas gift, it's a great read. I've read it, and he signed my copy when I was there in Philly about a couple of months ago, and it was a great read. So on with the show here. And just a little bit of background. You both were at Temple. You both met at the journalism classes, I believe, with this iconic picture.
1966.
Yes.
The Temple News staff.
Yes. So, Russell, you can take it away, and guys, I'll be here in the background to talk.
Okay, so let's see. We both entered Temple as freshmen in the fall of '64. I remember I asked somebody where the school newspaper was. This was on registration day, and they pointed me to this old rickety building named Wyatt Hall. And I remember walking up the steps, and as you got up the steps, you could hear the chatter of the old manual Royal typewriters. And I went up there and I said to someone, I said, how often does the paper come out? And they said 4 times a week. Well, I thought I had died and gone to heaven, because in high school, you're lucky if your school paper comes out maybe 6 times a year. And this was like every day. And I went into the sports office, and 2 fellas, Dave Friedman and Joe Happ, were the sports editors. And I guess I introduced myself. And I don't know, after about a month, David Friedman said to me, I hear you know a lot about boxing. I said, yeah, and I also know a lot about college basketball. So right off the bat, he let me cover Temple basketball as a freshman, which was really quite a coup. And we're sitting in the office one day, and in comes Ray. Now, this is 1964, and Vietnam is heated up, and Ray comes in wearing his ROTC uniform. And Dave and I looked at each other, said, we got to straighten this guy out. But, we were 2 kids who fell in love with something when we were kids, and we were able to turn it into, our lifetime vocation. And I don't know how many people are that fortunate, if you call that fortunate. What do you think, Ray?
You describe it very well. That's exactly how I remember it. And you're right. Wyatt Hall, who knew? It became my life's work for sure. and it became that actually is Wyatt Hall. That's
Yeah.
that's the sports department office on the second floor of Wyatt Hall. That was the year that I took over as sports editor, following you, Russ. You were the sports editor the year before. I became the sports editor the next year, and that's you with Guy Rogers, a Cherry and White Day. I remember that. But yeah, I mean, I really knew, at least I felt I knew, when I enrolled at Temple in '64 with you, that was what I wanted to do. I mean, there's no question in my mind that I wanted to be a writer, and more specifically, I wanted to be a sports writer. And so that's what I went to Temple to study. That's what I went to Temple to become. But you had other ambitions. I mean, as good as you were in the journalism school, and you were really good, and you were an editor right away. And I mean, it was pretty obvious to everybody that you really knew what you were doing. You were thinking about something else. I mean, I wasn't. I mean, I knew I'm home. This is what I want to do, and this is all I ever want to do. But as I got to know you, you began talking more and more about the fact that your real dream was to become a boxing promoter, which we all thought was pretty funny. We all used to say, "Oh, come on, Russ, this is come on, you're guys like you don't become boxing promoters." It just doesn't happen that way. But you know, the Blue Horizon was literally right down the street from our campus, and when we would walk across Broad Street to change classes, you would point down the street. You would point down Broad Street, and you would say, "Right down there, right down there, is where I'm going to reopen the Blue Horizon, and I'm going to start promoting boxing shows." And we'd say, "Yeah, sure, Russ, keep talking." And lo and behold, you made it happen. And I am so glad that you've written your book, because I mean, over the years, I told you, how many times did I tell you, Russell, you got to write this book? I mean, nobody can tell this story. Nobody can tell your story the way you can. First of all, you have just a tremendous life story to tell, and you're a really good writer who can tell it beautifully, which you've done. I'm so glad you wrote it, and everything you said is true. You should, if you're proud of it, you should be proud of it. It is one hell of a book, and I'm proud of you for doing it, and I enjoyed reading it. I mean, there was some of the stuff I knew, but a lot of the stuff was new to me, and it is really well told. And I would urge anybody out there that doesn't already have it to go get it, because it's about as good a read about this sport as you're ever going to find.
Well, I appreciate it. And I realized recently, Ray, that the year I was inducted into the Lou Klein Hall of Fame a few years after you, and they went around and interviewed different people, including you. And I think that was the first time I heard anybody say, you said it, you owe us a book. And I think that was the beginning of it. But going back to the Temple News, I remember that day we were sitting around the sports office, and I said, I'm going to be promoting fights. And you said, I want to cover Joe Namath from the press box at Shea Stadium.
Yep.
And I'll never forget that. And, you know, those were, you know, I told people, and I think I said it in my speech at the Lou Klein Awards, contrary to popular opinion, I did not attend Temple University. I attended the Temple News. And school was something. I remember one semester I scheduled all my classes to be over by noon so I could spend the whole afternoon at the Temple. I mean, you know, we felt we were like working a real job.
Absolutely.
Know?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you did it, but I know I did it. Was Temple had summer school where you could sign up and take classes in summer. And they had like an early session, and then they had a regular session. And the early session was you could take a class. You could take a full 3-credit class in like 3 weeks. I mean, it was ridiculously condensed. I mean, your day was like 4 hours, and then there was a midterm, and then there was a final, but you got it all done in like 3 weeks. And then there was a longer summer session. And I used to go every summer and take classes there and try and get all the the stuff that wasn't journalism stuff out of the way. You know, some of the English stuff, some of the history stuff, some of the science stuff, some of the requirements, just get them out of the way in the summer when I didn't have to think about anything else, and get them done so that when September rolled around and Temple News started to come out again, that I didn't have nearly as many classes. And most of the ones I had were journalism classes, which I could handle pretty easily. But, you know, once September came around, I was a full-time Temple News guy, as you were. So that having that summer school, I don't even know if the summer classes still exist at Temple, but having that available to us at that time was tremendous for just sort of clearing the table and allowing us to do the stuff that we really thought was important from September through the spring, which was put out a newspaper.
I did the exact same thing. Took summer classes so I wouldn't have that many classes in the fall and winter. But I'll tell you, I remember the one thing I remember from the first summer, and I'm sure you remember this. Temple had a football player named Leon Zarnacki who got killed in a car crash, I think that summer between our freshman and sophomore years. It was that summer. And the Temple News did print like occasionally during the summer. And I forget the name who was the editor, the managing editor. It was a short lady. And she wanted me to write the story. I said, I can't call his family. I said, I don't know what to do. And she finally came in a little bit later. She said, you don't have to call. But I had already called. I'd already made the call. And I just remember, you know, that sticks out in my mind from working on the Temple News during the summer. That was our fraternity. I had pledged AE Pi as a freshman.
Yeah.
Okay. But I spent so much time at the Temple News that they wanted to kick me out of the fraternity, which was fine. And then Stephen Sansweet, who was the editor, he made me assistant sports editor in my high freshman year. The problem was you had to have a 2.6 average to become an editor at the Temple News. And when we met at his house at the end of the low freshman year, he went around the room and asking everybody what their grade point average was. Mine was a 2.06. Okay. What's your average, Russ? 2.6. You know? And you know what's funny? As a low freshman, I didn't cut a single class, not one class. And then after I got that 2.06, I started cutting classes, and I got a 3.0 my second semester. So I said, oh, this is how it's done.
Well, I had a similar experience in that when we enrolled at Temple, when we started there, it was September of 1964, which was, we were enrolling and starting classes in college at exactly the moment that the Phillies collapsed. Oh, yeah. And in fact, I think one of my very first days of classes was the day that Chico Ruiz stole home. And they started the 10-game losing streak where they blew the pennant, where they choked away the pennant. And it was, and I had that in my desk. That's the 64 yearbook with Jim Bunning. And this is no exaggeration. The Phillies collapse absolutely traumatized me. I mean, I had rooted for that team my whole life growing up. I had ridden that bandwagon all summer, and being skeptical like everybody else, just, oh no, they're the Phillies, they're not going to do it. But everything started to go right. And you just saw the picture, that's Johnny Callison. That was Johnny Callison hitting the home run in the bottom of the ninth, the walk-off home run that won the All-Star game. You've seen the picture of Jim Bunning on the cover of the yearbook. That was the year that Jim Bunning pitched a perfect game. And those guys behind him are the guys that played behind him. So it's the summer when Jim Bunning pitches a perfect game on Father's Day. A guy with 9 children pitches a perfect game on Father's Day. Johnny Callison hits the game-winning home run in the bottom of the 9th inning to win the game for the National League. Dick Allen, whose picture just went up there and who finally just was in the Hall of Fame, is Rookie of the Year. The team turns not 1, not 2, but 3 triple plays. So everything sort of suggests to you, tells you that this is finally the year. You know, I know nobody expected it, and the Phillies have never really won anything, but 1964, this is the year. Everything's going their way. By the time September rolls around, they're 6.5 games ahead. You know, even I, who was a little doubtful that they could pull it off, now even I'm fully on board. We had already bought our World Series tickets. The World Series tickets had just arrived in the mail, and the bottom fell out of the whole thing. They lose 10 in a row and they blow the pennant. And I will tell you that I became such a zombie at that point that I went through the rest of that semester. I went to class, but I didn't hear a word that was being said. I didn't take a note. I was just sitting there trying to sketch out batting orders for the next game and trying to help them out of their streak. And by the end of the, I was so far behind by the time the baseball season was over, there was no digging out of it. And I mean, you said 2.06 was your grade point average. You were way ahead of me. I was under the Mendoza line. Okay. I was on academic probation, one step away from being booted out the door, all because, and my parents had no idea. When the transcript was mailed to the house, I came home one day and it had been mailed, and my parents had opened it up and it was sitting there on the kitchen table. I hadn't told them what desperate shape I was in. And so they open it up and they see this and they do, well, what is this? And I said, Dad, it's all Gene Mock's fault, which he thought was really not an adequate excuse. But I really, I mean, that was a rough time. I mean, that was a really rough time. Starting in college, it's a big adjustment anyway. I mean, going from high school to college, that going from especially an all boys high school to a campus where there are actually girls, that was distracting enough. But then you put the Phillies collapse on top of it. I just couldn't handle it. So yeah, I mean, you and I were not exactly on the dean's list that semester, but you bounced back in the spring, and so did I. We saved our lives and got our careers back on track. But that first semester at Temple is one that I'll always remember. But the best part of it, here's the best part of it. The best part of it was walking into my first journalism class and actually seeing a room full of people who wanted to do exactly what I wanted to do. You know, when I was in high school, they had a wall of books there called Careers in whatever. So it was careers in medicine, careers in accounting, careers in doctoring, or whatever. The whole wall of these career books. And there was one, Careers in Journalism. And my freshman year, I took it out and looked at it and looked in the back. It had never been signed out. Nobody had ever, in all the years of that school, nobody had ever had enough interest in journalism to pick that book up. Well, I read it, put it back. When I was a senior, I figured, let me just read that thing again. I think this is what I want to do. So I pulled it off the shelf. I opened it up. I was still the only one that had ever taken it out. So there was a part of me that wondered, is there something wrong with me? It doesn't seem like anybody else in the world really wants to do this. But when I went to Temple and walked into that class the first day and saw a whole room of people who were as interested in journalism as I was, it was very reassuring. And that's what okay, I guess this is all right. I guess this is something I want to do. And then for the next 4 years, I had a great time. I met great people, made some great friends like you, and got what I felt was a great education in the classroom, but more specifically, putting out the Temple News 4 times a week, because that was a challenge.
When you were talking before about when Johnny Callison hit the home run to win the All-Star game, I was working for my father as an apprentice plumber, and I'm in some I don't know, some company or some home, and I'm listening to it on the radio, and Callison hit the home run, and I yelled out, "The Phillies won the All-Star game." But here's a piece of trivia for you that I told someone yesterday. Jim Bunning's perfect game on Father's Day. That was the same day that the civil rights workers Cheney, Goodwin, and Schwerner were murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi, trying to get, black people to the right to vote.
Right.
Gives me the chills when I think, here I am sitting in my house in lily white Bala Kinwood, watching Jim Bunning pitch a perfect game, and 1,000 miles to the south, civil rights workers are being murdered. When you really think about it, it gives you the chills. But those, wow, it was a different world. But I was thinking the other day, do you want to say something, Carl?
I'm just, fascinated by this conversation. And I'm a 10-year-old. I'm a lot younger at that point, but living through the 64 whole thing as a young Phillies fan. And my father taking me to my first game at Connie Mack Stadium, and that whole thing about the green grass and the red uniforms. And one of my first podcasts, my dear friend Sam Carchidi, who made a nice little career for himself. We went to college together at Glassboro State. But then we did one of our first podcasts about the collapse of the 64 Phillies. So I'm going to have to go relive that. I wish I had you guys on there for that one too, but just reliving it as, a little bit younger than you guys were at that time, and hearing how it was traumatic for you too. And I kind of realized my dad said, they're not going to the World Series. I said, oh, that's sad. So continue. I just wanted to interject that. I was a little younger than you, but also remember it.
The weekend after the 10 losses in a row, they went to Cincinnati and they beat the Reds. And Sunday, the Eagles had a home game. I think it was with the Steelers. I'm not sure. And the race was still up in the air. St. Louis had to lose. The Phillies had to win. And in the middle of the game, of the football game, you heard this roar from the crowd because everyone had their transistor radios on, and the Phillies had just gone ahead of Cincinnati that day. So everybody in the city, 60,000 people, you'd think the Eagles had just won the Super Bowl with the roar went up. And the Phillies won the game, but unfortunately, I think so did St. Louis. So they got blocked out of the pennant. But I still have my ticket, Ray. I still have my World Series ticket.
Well, your memory is very good, Russ. They were playing the Steelers. The Phillies were playing the Reds in Crosley Field. And the Cardinals were playing the Mets, who were, in 64, the Mets were a terrible team.
Right.
So the odds were against the Phillies, although the Mets beat the Cardinals on Saturday.
Right.
To keep the thing alive. So Sunday, everything was on the line. The Phillies had to if the Phillies beat the Reds and the Mets beat the Cardinals, they would have been tied. And then the Phillies and the Cardinals would have had to have a playoff to see who played the Yankees in the World Series. We were all at the Eagles game, and we all had our transistor radios. And normally we're listening to Bill Campbell tell us about the Eagles game, but everybody was listening to the Phillies game. And when the Phillies went ahead of the Reds, and I think they won the game 10-0. They won it easy. A cheer went up. A cheer went up, and the guys on the field had no idea what the cheer was about. But it was about baseball, and it wasn't about what they were doing.
Oh, Jesus. So I was telling someone the other day, I was complaining about the business of boxing. And, well, I still like to go to see a good fight. I said, yeah, but I like the progression of fights making fights. And we're seniors at Temple, and we're having lunch every day, it seems like, at the Owl's Nest. And a fighter had come into Philly and scored a couple of knockouts by the name of Joe Shaw. He had knocked out Percy Manning and C.L. Lewis. And then the way it was in those days, they put him in with Kitten Hayward. And for a month, I'm telling everybody at lunch, Joe Shaw's fighting Kitten Hayward at the arena. I was really pumped about it. And I think we all went to see the fight together. But what I'm saying is, in those days, those were the fights that you made. And there wasn't the ducking that you see today. But, it was just, what else? Besides you and I, there was Ron Pollock, whose dad, Harvey, was Mr. Stat for the NBA. And then a year later along came Dick Weiss. I mean, when you think, and then Jill Chalfin Porter, who was 30 years the city side columnist for the Daily News, and Marcy Schatzman, who I see down here in Florida, still works for the Sun Sentinel or does PR. We had a lot of talent. in that class, in our journalism class, when you think about it.
An awful lot. And then right behind us, 1 year later, Dick Weiss came aboard from Upper Darby High School. And Dickie, went on to become Dickie Hoops Weiss, who's probably one of the most celebrated college basketball writers in this generation.
Right.
I mean, I still, you had become the overall makeup editor of the paper. I had become the sports editor of the Temple News. When Dickie Weiss came walking in the office with his gym bag and his Jeff cap on and said that he wanted to join the sports staff, and I'm the sports editor, so I'm making these decisions. And I said, okay, fine. What are you interested in? And he said, oh, I love basketball. I want to cover basketball. And I said, look, you don't just walk in here and say you're going to start covering basketball. It just doesn't work that way. I said, Temple basketball is the big sport, so forget that. I said, but I tell you this, I need somebody to cover swimming. So if you want to cover swimming, you got it. And he said, okay, I'll do swimming. And so he covered swimming. So there you go. I mean, I had the most prolific, most celebrated college basketball writer in America walk in my office and tell me he wanted to cover basketball, and I made him cover swimming. So that'll tell you a little bit about what my executive capabilities were and judge of talent. But to your point, Russ, I mean, the people that we had working there in the sports department and throughout the paper were very good. And you look at the careers that they've had and where they've gone and the things that they've accomplished in a lot of fields. It really speaks well. And the thing that I remember about it was how fearless the Temple News was, how fearless we were, and how independent a voice we were. I mean, we challenged the administration. We took on the president's office. We took on the athletic department. We were a fully functioning, independent, clear-voiced news operation. And we didn't bow down to anybody. And the people of the higher ups, I mean, they put pressure on our editors, and they put pressure on the different people on the staff to say, wait a minute, no, that doesn't fly here. You're still students here. We run this place. Well, you might run this place, but we run this newspaper. And that independent streak and that willingness to speak up to government and report in the manner that good reporters do, and to be fair and honest about your reporting, that we were exercising that even as college students putting out the Temple News. And I just think that was a great lesson to be learned, that, the Temple News, it's Temple, but it's still news. And we're going to do this job the way professional reporters do. And I think the people that were working there when we were there, set a very, very good example that I think still continues on. I mean, I still see the Temple News. I mean, they still do good work up there, and they've had a lot of problems on campus over the last few years. And Temple News still does a very honest job of covering the news up there.
Well, here's a story you'll remember. The end of my sophomore year, one of the last columns I wrote as sports editor was titled "Our Life in the Bush League," in which I criticized Temple's teams for playing rinky-dink schools, okay? And of course, Ernie Casale, who was the athletic director, he went ballistic. And he wrote this long letter to the editor, which we printed, where he basically said that the Temple News should be a tool of the athletic department. So the next year, we entered a team in the intramural basketball league, and we called ourselves the Temple News Tools. Okay. And the opening game, as you remember, we were playing against the football players, and I was the captain, and I went out, and the captain on the other team was Ed Puste, and I went to shake his hand, and it was like shaking Sonny Liston's hand. He was like 5 times my size. But we had a lot of fun.
I remember that very well. I remember we the Temple News Tools, and our jerseys were TNT. And we didn't have our real names on the back. We each had sort of a mock name on the back. And that was sort of the game that we played. It was, but we really had a lot of fun. And it was just a great bunch of people. And, I learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes, which is how you learn in life. But I enjoyed it so much. When I go out now, and a lot of times people ask me, they have kids that are interested in going to college and studying to be journalists and study communications, radio, TV, whatever. And they ask me, where would you recommend? And, you talk about the obvious. You talk about Columbia, Missouri. You talk about Syracuse, Northwestern. But I'll put Temple right up there with any of them. I thought I got a great education there. And with all the opportunities and the way that program has grown since we left, it's even better now than it was then. So if anybody's out there and you've got somebody in your family in high school now that's thinking in terms of maybe a career in communications and they're thinking about college, where they want to go, take a good hard look at Temple, because it was then and still is today a really fine school for that.
I'm so happy that I got turned down at my first choice, Northwestern. I got turned down at Syracuse, Columbia, NYU. So like the guy in the ad said, I chose Temple. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I don't know how my life would have turned out if I'd gone away to school and been outside of Philadelphia, number one, for the boxing, for that part. But the teachers, I remember going to one of the labs or whatever. John Praxta from the Daily News was in charge of an editing lab. And he taught me so much about editing copy. By the time I got the job at the Bulletin, I was, I knew what I was doing, and let me tell you something. You started there before I did. Did you know this, that Al Schreier, who I loved, or Casale, one of the two, called Jackie Wilson on the phone and said I couldn't be trusted? Did you know that?
No.
Well, Jackie Wilson told me that after I was working there for full time. He said, we were told that you couldn't be trusted, but we've learned otherwise. But Ray, to have a full-time job as a senior from midnight to 8, and then going to school from 9 to 1, at that point, I had my whole life planned out. I was going to be the boxing writer at the Bulletin at that point. And I thought, it doesn't get any better than this. I'm set. And then, of course, Jack Fried, who'd been there since the 20s, kept getting extensions on his retirement. Thank God. People said, you're going into a dying business, boxing. It turned out the Bulletin died a lot earlier than I did.
I know. But you talked about that was something that you really wanted to do, and you made it happen. And I still remember your first card at the Blue Horizon. It was the headliner was Benny Briscoe against Tito Marshall. And there were some guys that we had never heard of at that point that were on the undercard that turned out to be really good fighters. I think Boogaloo Watts fought that night. I think Willie Monroe may have fought that night. I think Eugene Cyclone Hart may have fought that night. I think Jerry Judge may have fought that night.
Yep.
And all of us from Temple, all of us from the sports department who had heard you talk about this for years, we all went. We all had to go to be there. And it was just so great for us to walk up the steps into that second floor walk up, and walk in there and see the line at the box office and just feel the buzz in that building of the excitement that people had that the Blue Horizon was open again and boxing was back in North Philadelphia, and you made it happen, and that night was a great night. Benny wins on a spectacular knockout. We see a whole bunch of young guys who are going to go on and become headliners of their own, and you were off and running, and everything that you had talked about, all the things that you ever wanted to do, it all sort of came into focus that night. And we walked out of there, stood on North Broad Street, Frank Bertucci, me, Dick Weiss, we all looked at each other and said, damn, he really made it happen.
I remember Sandy Grady came. Here's the guy whose copy I had been editing for 2 years, and he's coming to interview me, and he wrote a wonderful story called titled "Crazy Dream Comes True," and he had talked about us talking about my boxing career while we were at the Owl's Nest and places like that. And it was just a, wonderful night. But we were privileged. I mean, there were so many good journalists in Philadelphia that we were privileged to work with. I miss that. I don't see that as much today. When I read some of the old columns by Grady and Hockman and Tom Cushman. And, I tell this story. I brought Dynamite Douglas into town once, tough black fighter from Ohio who could punch. And he scored a spectacular knockout at the arena in like 1 minute. What a way to introduce himself to a tough Philly crowd. And when the fight was over, he did a dance around the ring. And Tom Cushman, and I'm going up there, I'm pounding on Bruce Trampler's shoes, who was the manager. I said, we're going to make a lot of money here. And Tom Cushman wrote in the Daily News the next day, he said, after the fight, promoter J. Russell Peltz felt a warm glow in the vicinity of his wallet. But you know what the thing is? These guys had to write on deadline. You didn't have 2 or 3 days or a week to write imagine Sandy Grady coming in night after night and delivering the kind of prose that they could deliver, that people don't appreciate that. Not only could they write, but they could write quickly. It's almost like a lost art. It's just, when I told my dad I was going to be a sports writer, he said, what are you, nuts? You can't make any money doing that. And then when I told him I was going to become a boxing promoter, he laid down next to me one night in bed. He said, why don't you get a real job and promote fights on the side? But you know what, Ray? We never thought about money. We just wanted to do something that we loved. Mm-hmm. Today, it seems like it's how much money can you make doing this? But we did things that, what's the old line? If you love what you do, you never go to work a day in your life.
Right.
For my dad who worked construction, if you don't mind, if you love what you do, the money will follow. It'll be there rather than go there, And people at my age, I'm a little bit younger. People saying, I'm 71. They're saying, Carl, what are you doing podcasts at your age? I says, I love but you're not going to make any money. If I make some, great. If not, this is wonderful. So having you on here talking about this is wonderful. So I'll go back into the curtain. You guys can continue.
No, I think that's true. I mean, my father, who was an engineer, and later became the vice president of a steel company, was a very successful man. When I was talking about what I wanted to do, I told him I wanted to be a sports writer, and he said, and I said, but, I know it's hard. I know that you probably aren't going to make a whole lot of money, and those jobs aren't easy to come by. And so I was thinking about, maybe I could go somewhere and be a teacher, or maybe I could go to law school. I mean, all the other things. What I really wanted to do was this, but if it doesn't work out, well, maybe I could think this. And my father said, don't do that. My father said, don't do that. He said, you can make a living doing anything in life. You can make a living doing anything. He said, but the people who are really happy in this world are the people who are doing what they love. He said, so you know what you want to do, go do it. And I thought that was such great advice, and so that's what I did. I just said, okay, that's what I want to do. I'm going to go do it. And when I went, my first job out of college was not as a sports writer. I went to a paper called the Delaware County Daily Times out in Chester, and they didn't have an opening in sports, so they put me on news side, and they started me at $100.25 a week. And the editor, the managing editor, when he told me, he said, we'll hire you. We don't have any opening in sports, but we'll put you on news. And he said, we'll start you at $100.25 a week. Now, look, I wasn't expecting to make a lot of money, but I thought I was going to make more than that. And so I went home that night, and I'm still living at home. So I'm sitting at the dinner table, and my father says, well, how did the job interview go? And I said, it went great. I said, I got the job. And he said, oh, that's great. Well, how much are they paying? And now I'm thinking, okay, now how am I going to tell him this? So I could never lie. And I certainly could never lie to my father. So I'm trying to think, what's the best way to tell him the truth without him saying, what? So I said, I'm going to get paid $125. thinking he would at least think it was $125, which he did. He said, $125? Well, it's not much, but it's a start. I said, yeah, it's a start. thank goodness it was $100.25, so I could actually tell him that. It could sound more palatable, and it would not be a lie.
You know what? You're fortunate that football is still a monster. It is still a sport that is loved by everybody. If boxing had stayed boxing, I would still be in it. I was talking to David Feldman the other day, one of Marty's sons, who is now in charge of the bare knuckle fighting. They're doing a show at the Wells Fargo Center in January. They're going to draw 15,000 people. You know, I'm not into it, but one of my fighters, Joey DeVaco, looks like he's going to transform into bare knuckle. But I said, David, if boxing hadn't gone into the toilet, the UFC and the bare knuckle would never be what they are today. Mm-hmm. And he said he agreed. He said, yeah, we wouldn't get the audience because they'd still be watching the fights.
Yeah.
But, you know, you said earlier you were my first fight and my last fight in 2019. And now I'm just working as a consultant, helping guys with losing records, 500 records, just to keep my hand in it. But I just don't, it's not the boxing I grew up with. And it doesn't look, I mean, when we have to depend on Saudi Arabia to finance the big fights and world champions or top contenders fight once a year, you know, it's just not, you know, when I think that it was my whole life in high school and we'd go to a party on a Friday night and all the kids would be upstairs dancing, I'd be down in the basement watching Paul Pender and Sugar Ray Robinson on television. I mean, I couldn't wait till Friday night. I couldn't wait. Dad said, well, if you studied chemistry as much as you study the ring record book, you'd have better grades. You know, but, you know, you're fortunate because, and I'll tell you this, Ray, and I didn't always watch all the Eagles games, but I always watched post-game live because whenever I would see you on post-game live, I felt proud that, you know, that this guy and I, you know, we came up together and look at him. Look what he's doing. He's the most, and I said this to Carl earlier, the most beloved analyst in the city.
A great segue because I concur 100%. And Ray, real quick, I see those certain statues behind you. I'm assuming they're Emmys. Real quickly, how did you get into television? And if I could just say, because I'm actually out in California, I've been out here 6 years, but I'm still in Philadelphia at heart with sports. But after every Eagles game, no matter if they won or lost, I'd always wait to when you had that yellow notepad and you were ready for bear with Barkan and whoever else you had on there. But this is actually, I pulled this up on Sunday after the Eagles win, even though it was a win, but it wasn't great, but just a little taste.
Look, we've talked a lot about the slow starts. And to this point, you can't say it's hurt them too much because they're 11-2. But as you move down the line here.
So that's a little bit at the end. But then in 2018, we had the Eagles won their Super Bowl. I couldn't wait to the post game. So with your approval, I was able to pull this off of NBC Sports. But it just shows the epitome about the passion and how we all broke down. We cried along with you. So this is February of 18, after the Eagles just won the Super Bowl in Minnesota, and we all cried along with you.
Beautiful thing. A beautiful, beautiful thing. Oh, my goodness.
It was just, to everybody that didn't have a chance to see this, I mean, my grandparents, my mom's parents, my Uncle Kevin, everybody had said this wasn't possible. And I've waited 44 years, and I swear I thought I'd never see this day.
Yeah,
And
but you did.
I'm a diehard Eagles fan, diehard Flyers fan, diehard Phillies fan, and Philadelphia, just enjoy this, because I don't know when it's going to happen again, but boy, this is sure fun tonight.
You know, you told the story about the eagle landing on our garage yesterday.
Yeah.
My wife told me about that. She said, I woke up this morning. We've been living in that house for 30 years. And we've had pigeons land on there. We've had cats climbing on there. We've had hawks. Everything else. We had never had an eagle. My wife said to me yesterday, she said, I woke up this morning and I look out and there was an eagle sitting on our garage. And look, I don't believe in mysticism and things, and she said, that's got to either be the spirit of your father or your mother. I truly believe that.
Yeah.
To be able.
I just have to share that with people who may not be familiar with the Philadelphia sports and the local media. And even now I'm out here, I look at it through other social media. So, Ray, how did you get into television with all those awards back there? A little quick about that.
An accident, really. I didn't really aspire to be either in radio or television. I thought I was going to be a sports writer my whole life, but the business changed. The whole landscape changed, and there became a lot of people crossing over, going from print to electronic and back and forth. And so I got an opportunity to do that. They created all sports talk radio in Philadelphia, 24-hour sports talk, which I never thought we'd see, but it came along and they asked me if I'd give it a try. So I did. And then they created a cable TV, all sports Philadelphia cable TV network, Comcast Sportsnet. And they asked me if I would take part in that. So I did. These things just kind of fell in my lap, and I tried them, and it worked out. It worked out great. I really enjoyed doing it. I don't know if if you ask me what I am, how I view myself, I still think I'm a writer. If you ask me what I do, I still would say I'm a writer. I don't think about the other stuff. Writing is kind of what I do. And the stuff I do on TV and radio, to me, is just really kind of an extension of that. But the Emmy Awards, I got when I was working at NFL Films, which I never thought that I'd ever become a filmmaker, but I did. And that was, again, sort of an accident. NFL Films just happened to be in Philadelphia. I got to know the guy, the Sable family who ran it. We became friends. And at one point, Steve Sable said, how would you feel about coming to work at NFL Films? You've been covering football forever. You know the game. You know how to tell a story. Why don't you come tell a story with us? And so it was a hard decision to make because I was 50 years old. I'd been in newspapers my whole life. I'd certainly never been a film editor or a screenwriter, but I just trusted Steve. And I certainly knew what NFL Films was all about. So I said, you know what, let me give this a try. So I went there and I worked there for 12 years and worked on some great projects and wound up bringing home 6 Emmy Awards, which, I never thought that would ever happen, but it did. So it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed that. And I guess the ultimate was probably the night in Minneapolis when the Eagles won Super Bowl 52. And we were there live doing the post-game show. And, I, who had always been Mr. Unemotional, I had always been Mr. Objective, Mr. Don't get yourself all caught up. Don't become part of the story. All the things we always say. And then that night, my son, who's a cameraman for NFL Films, just surprised me by walking on the set to celebrate the victory. And we hugged and did the father and son thing. And then it just all came out. And at the time, I felt a little embarrassed about it, have all that happening on live TV. But the reaction among people who saw it and people who still talk about it to this day is really cool. Because I think, Michael Barkan kind of said it. He said, you guys, you didn't just put your arms around each other. You put your arms around the entire Delaware Valley, because that's what everybody was feeling that night. And so, it was special then, and it's still special today. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was special for me, and I was over there in Jersey with a couple friends, and yes, embraced all of it. And it's just, I have to say, I did a podcast a couple months back with Sam Corchity, and we did the one on Bill Campbell with his daughter. And actually, Ray, we used one of the clips that you did produce for NFL Films, talking about Bill and the '60 championship game, and we cannot finish this podcast, and hopefully this is not going to be a one and done. You in 2025, you come back, because your story, Russell's story, cannot be told in 45 minutes to an hour or whatever we do today. So hopefully you will be coming back in the new year for another episode. But I do have to say that if I could find the pic, that you were a big Tommy McDonald fan at the 1960 championship game. And I mentioned it to Russell. You mentioned the one thing that what stadiums don't have lights? The 1960 championship game was at noon because there was no lights at Franklin Field, just in case it went in overtime. So how sports has changed, one classic picture of that.
I know. That's an amazing picture. To tell people that was actually an NFL championship game. First of all, you've got the old-fashioned goalposts, which are right up on the goal line. Right. Now they're on the back end zone. Now that was up on the goal line. You have a straight-on kicker. Not a soccer-style kicker. That's Paul Hornung. And if anybody not that familiar with Franklin Field, that's what it looks like. It's a horseshoe. And at the end, that end of the field, the west end of the field, you have Whiteman Hall, which is the Penn Athletic Building with all the offices and all that stuff there. So, yeah, that doesn't look anything like the stadium that they play at in Dallas or Lambeau Field, but that's what it was in 1960, and that's where the Eagles won the world championship. And that was a day that those of us that were there, all 65,000 of us, will never forget.
Well, one more thing that I have to say, I had some friends around here because I buy the package and I have a Red Zone. And I said, well, back in the day, I couldn't find the picture, but like on the sideline, they had 2 5-gallon drums of water with a ladle. There was no Gatorade. There was nothing with the players. And that's the way they did it. So that's what I remember. It's like, oh my God, no individual squirt bottle, a ladle with a 5-gallon. And if it was freezing, it would be frozen. So I'll let you guys continue a little bit more.
Yeah. Actually, it was at Franklin Field, it was a bucket. It was a bucket with water with a ladle in it. And guys would be coming up and, 50 guys drinking out of the same bucket of water out of the same ladle for an entire day. I mean, today that would be unthinkable. But that was, that was the game of the 50s and 60s. And that was the game that I grew up with. And that was the game that I fell in love with. And that was, I met Tommy McDonald. We became friends, and we stayed friends for the rest of our lives. It was, I feel really fortunate. There's Tommy, and that was the 1960 championship game. He had just scored the touchdown to put the Eagles ahead of the Packers, and they went on and won that game 17-13. And then Tommy and I had met him at training camp before that when I was a little kid, got his autograph, carried his helmet. We remained friends, and then later on in life, when I became a sports writer, I sort of led the effort to try and get him in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which he certainly deserved. And it took a long time, but finally in 1998, he got in the Hall of Fame, and he asked me to be his presenter. So that's always been a real special chapter in my life, is developing a relationship with Tommy, who was a wonderful, just a wonderful friend. He became a wonderful friend, and even though he's passed now, I'm still very close to his family.
Well, let me, I don't want to end on a somber note, but I have to say this, Carl, that, a good friend, you may not see him that often. You may see him every 6 months, every year, sometimes maybe not even for a year or two. And since we graduated from Temple in 68, I don't know how many times I saw Ray over the years. But when we do get together, it's like time stood still. It's the same old jokes. It's like we're best buddies. But I have to tell you this, that I don't think I'd seen Ray in a few years or had even spoke to him. And when my oldest son passed away in 2017 at the age of 38, there was Ray, showed up at this service out of nowhere. And things like that, you never forget. You never forget. There were people that I'm close to, or I thought I was, that never showed up at the service. And here was Ray, who I hadn't spoken to, I'm sure, in a few years, maybe since Ray, maybe since Frank Bertucci's funeral, when we went together a few years from that. But things like that, you just never forget. And I was very appreciative.
That was, I remember that. And I didn't know it had happened. I just was reading the paper and saw the obituary and said, oh my God, I have to be there. And, you're right. We don't see each other that often, but it just speaks to the kind of friendship that we had back in the day. We had 4 years together at Temple where we worked side by side. And you went to the Bulletin and I went to the Bulletin, and we shared a lot of history together. And, you make friends, there are a lot of acquaintances and there are a lot of people you meet in your life. But then there are the friends. There are the people that are really special to you. And you don't have to see them every day. You don't have to see them every month, but that bond will always be there. And the friendship that we started back on North Broad Street was something that's always going to be a very, very important part of my life. And that's why I was really looking forward to having this conversation, because I knew whenever I think about those days or whenever I think about you and me, it's all good memories. It's really a lot of fun. And I'm not kidding when I say this, that I am really proud of what you did and the challenge that you took on and the success that you had. And all the International Boxing Hall of Fame and the honors that you've won. I remember how we used to tell you, Russ, you're never going to do this. Come on. I mean, it's a fantasy. And the fact is, by golly, you went and made it happen. And not only that, then you went out and you wrote a fantastic book about it. And I think it's great. And I am really proud of you. And I look forward to the next time that we can get together.
Goes both ways, Ray. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, Ray, hopefully that you will be able to come on again in 25. We're going to try to take Russell's podcast and his YouTube page to another level, because he does have a lot to say. And I just realized, and I mentioned to him, I said, with everybody that he knows in media, I'm surprised somebody didn't already post. And Russell I don't think I can say it, but Russell made a comment. They really didn't care. So I thank this opportunity. Ray, I know you have books. I don't know if they're still out there. I actually have a couple little clips. Is any of your books still available?
Yes, they are. That one is the book called One Last Read, which is a collection of my writings from over the years. And then I have another book called Finished Business, which is really my memoir, a right back through the 50 years of my career. There you go. That's that one. And I just finished writing another book, which is called Look What the Kid Wrote Today. And it's, I guess it's sort of a second memoir, which talks about, which is really a lot of the stuff that I couldn't get in this book, that the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I think there's another book here. So I sat down and I wrote that. So that's called Look What the Kid Wrote Today. And that should be out next fall. And
nice. Now, is this still obviously
Eagles Encyclopedia? Yeah, I've done 3 editions of that. And if the Eagles actually go on and win the Super Bowl this year, guess what? Get ready for edition 4.
I don't know how you do it, Ray.
Yeah, we couldn't finish without plugging what you have wrote, because I know not only what you've written for the papers and what you've done on TV and actually radio, but then also the books that you've written. So yeah, that. And Russell, before the end of the year, we have to plug one more time for the holiday for your book that Ray endorsed also. And I have it. I have my signed copy when I came to Philly, and I appreciate that for what it's worth. So anything in closing between both of you guys before we end up finishing this podcast and going into the new year? Anything in closing?
I'm just fine. I appreciate Ray coming on. Very good.
Most definitely.
A lot of memories.
Most definitely. Ray?
Carl, it was great to be with you guys. And it's been a fun year. And The Eagles season is very interesting. They're a good team, and they have a chance. I think people are getting a little ahead of themselves, thinking that they're going to win this thing for sure. Nothing's for sure, but they have a chance. They're pretty good, and I'm just enjoying being along for the ride.
I just hope Barkley doesn't get hurt, and the people's heads in New York and the Giants are exploding because getting rid of Barkley, it's just amazing. So hopefully they will continue on this road. Well, I want to thank you guys again, and hopefully in 2025 we'll get you on soon enough and see. Maybe we're going to be going to the Super Bowl for the Eagles, and then more video there. So thank you again. And Ray, I'll just mention once we're done, just stay on because everything has to go down to the server. So don't press any buttons afterwards, but then we'll talk a little bit afterwards. Thank you again. We'll talk soon. Thank you, Russell.
Thanks,
Have
Carl.
a great holiday
Yeah.
and buy his book.